My name is Bobby Turman, and this is Suzanne Hebden. This is Kathy Owens. We're all here today on behalf of Cannonsburgh. We've got a little information we'd like to share with you about our favorite little village here in our village. All right. Cannonsburgh, as a site, as a village in our town, got started back in 1975. There was a national competition at the time in which Murfreesboro was participating for our bicentennial celebration as a nation. Murfreesboro placed 16th out of the nation with its proposal for this historic project. And as such, they were awarded a $75,000 donation in order to have the funds to start the village with. The former mayor Westbrook, was a big part of getting this project done, and in the very center of the opening of the village, there's a rather large monument to him and his family's works there. Let's see. I'll give you a little bit of history about why Cannonsburgh is called Cannonsburgh and why Murfreesboro was almost called Cannonsburgh. Cannonsburgh was the original name of Murfreesboro. It was named in honor of Newton Cannon, a rising Williamson County politician and veteran of the Creek War. He would later become Tennessee's first Whig governor, and we were changed to Murfreesboro about 30 days after we were called Cannonsburgh, because on November 29th, 1811, at the request of Colonel William Lytle, you'll recognize that name from various streets and other things in town, he donated some land for the public square, a community cemetery, and the adjacent First Presbyterian Church. Lytle asked that since he made such a large donation of land, that the town be renamed to honor his friend, Colonel Hardy Murphy. Let's see here. Got my spectacles on. Now then, Cannonsburgh used to be not part of the city government at this time. Currently, we're a Parks and Rec location. But originally, we had our own mayor of Cannonsburgh and a town council that presided over all the events that happened in Cannonsburgh and all the different activities that went on there. Eventually, we did indeed become part of the Recs and Parks and Recreation Department of Murfreesboro, and they're the ones that get to decide all the different events and things that happen. There's a lot of benefits that come along with that. There's a lot of funding and things for concerts, movies, and things that we have there. Our Food Truck Fridays that we have now that previously might have been just a little bit out of reach. A lot of these decisions were made in our very own town hall, which is one of the buildings that we have on site. Originally, the town hall at Cannonsburgh Village was a cook room and a structure known as the Jack Holt Building. That was one of the buildings that was transferred to Cannonsburgh from near Eagleville. A few of our buildings were brought in and moved there. A lot of them were actually constructed on spot. One of the buildings that was constructed there was the grist mill. The grist mill was constructed based on an old feed mill that was nearby and is very typical of the type of mills that were around at the time. The water for the mill, came from a nearby creek. It was Town Creek for us anyway, and the water would flow up over the top of the wheel and down in order to power all the machinery that was in it. Near our grist mill there, we have an iron bridge, which if you're parking at Cannonsburgh, you go park in the parking lot, it's going to be one of the very first things that you encounter. It's an old iron bridge. It's one of the first iron bridges actually constructed in the county. It was out on Stewart's Creek on a turnpike between Smyrna and Murfreesboro. And it was called at the time the Witch Bridge or Monkey Woman Bridge. Why, I have no idea. But that's a story for another time. It was a toll bridge, and that was very typical of the roads and bridges back then. They were very privatized. There really were no private roads, and there were families and companies that maintained these roads. And if you wanted to use them, you had to pay a little coin to use them or cross them. And the last thing that I have to speak today is something everyone's going to have probably heard of: the world's largest cedar bucket. We sometimes have the nickname of the Bucket City or the Bucket Town because we here at Cannonsburgh have the world's largest cedar bucket. It is 24 feet high, and its diameter at its base is 9 feet around. It's about as tall as I am, minus hat, and about as big around as I could extend my arms. It was built in 1887 by the Tennessee Red Cedar Wooden Works Company, which was based here in Murfreesboro. It was originally displayed here until it was moved in 1893 to the Chicago World's Fair, and then later on to the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, which is where I believe they actually filled it with beer. That's a lot of John Barleycorn. The Cedar Bucket Factory burned in 1952, and local grocer Krieger's Market bought the item to display it. It was auctioned off in 1965 and went to an amusement park in Rossville, Georgia. And then finally it was brought in 1976 back to Cannonsburgh to be part of our display there. Now sadly, the original bucket at some point was the victim of a fire. Some folks say it was arson. Other stories have it that a cinder from our active blacksmith shop that we have in the village may have rode the wind over to it and caught fire. We really don't know exactly what happened to it that it caught fire, but sadly it did. And eventually the blacksmith shop that's located in our village undertook the task of restoring the bucket, and in 2011, for the 35th anniversary of Cannonsburgh, it was brought out as a brand new thing. They salvaged the handle and what bands and things that they could and managed to put it back together. And we've actually still got it on site. You can come see it. You can't play in it, but you can come look at it. I'd like to thank you very much for your time today, and I'm going to let one of these young ladies talk to you next.
I'm Kathy Owen, and I have been a tour guide at Cannonsburgh for about 15 years. So I'm pretty much going to address that part of it. First off, I wanted to say that, in fact, Channel 4 even did a program on it. We're the only greenway that has any historical significance attached to it in the state of Tennessee. And a couple of years ago, Channel 4 even did a little program on it and an interview with us. And I'm going to talk mostly about my favorite buildings that are covered on tours. When we do our tours, we always do them in costume. And the Lehman House, which is the two-story log house, if y'all have been there, was originally between Las Casas and Milton. And there were 10 children raised there. It was built by Green Lehman. And the front part of the house went back to the 1820s. And interestingly enough, they have a window in the dining room where they would hand the food out to their farm hands. And it's one of my very favorite houses. And we do have it when we do some of our programs open to the public. I do tours of it. Other times it's just open if you want to get dressed for a wedding. And then I wanted to talk about the schoolhouse. And we have it set up as a one-room schoolhouse. The original schoolhouses were funded by the parents in the community. And they had one teacher. He taught all the children. Size of the children depended on the size of the community. My father actually taught in one in Jackson County, Tennessee. And we have our blackboard is made of wood because people used almost anything they had. Of course, it had to be replaced pretty often. And then we have the telephone house. And our telephone house, one of the first operators was Miss Ada Rowland. And the house was originally between Rockvale. She was a widow with a young child, and it was privately owned by a telephone company. So she was on call 24 hours a day. And if you wanted to talk to anyone, you had to ring up Miss Ada, and then she would connect you. And if you come to Cannonsburgh on our switchboard, there's very few cords, and that sort of lets you know how many people in the early 1900s in that area really had telephones. I did a tour one time, and there was a gentleman that came and said when he was a little boy, he used to sit out in the yard and watch Miss Ada at her switchboard. And of course, she lived and worked there also. Then I wanted to talk briefly about our chapel. Our chapel was also moved there. It was originally a school, and we already had the one-room schoolhouse, so they did some work to it and made it into a chapel. And we have done, as far as I can tell, over 4,000 weddings there since 1976 when it opened. And our stained glass windows came from a church in Georgia that was being dismantled. And originally, I don't have any provenance on them, but they came from Germany, we were told. And I had some ladies come back several years ago from that church to visit the stained glass windows. So they were interested in them. And let's see, our office was also a house where we have our office there. And it was the first home of the Chamber of Commerce. And I think it moved in 1997. It was there for about 4 or 5 years. And as far as I can tell, it was the very first home. And as far as our programs, I want to talk a little bit about the programs we have. Coming up this March 25th, we host a community yard sale. We do it twice a year, and of course there's no admission. We do it from, I think, 7 to 12. And then coming up April 22nd, we do our spring festival, which we call Pioneer Days. And there is no admission charge. We will have a few concession booths. There will be demonstrations, there'll be dancing, there'll be music. The Lehman House that I spoke of will be open for tours. And then we will have, of course, we host Uncle Dave Macon Days the second weekend in July. And it's one of the largest events of that kind in the state of Tennessee for the old-time music. And if you've never been, it's wonderful. If you like that kind of music, it's really, they have a lot of very prominent bluegrass groups. And it's also a competition in old-style dancing and banjo and fiddle. It is Friday and Saturday. And let's see, and then of course we have a fall festival, which will be in October. And then we started something a couple of years ago, the third Friday. We have music, and I think we'll have food trucks. And the Antique Car Garage, which is located there, they have their meetings. They always have a few cars. And again, admission to that is free. And we'll have music and all that. And let's see. I think that about covers everything. Thank you.
Well, my name is Suzanne Hebden, but I was born a saint, St. Clair. St. Clair Center is not named after my father, which many people thought it was, because he spent a lot of time and effort into that when he retired and was very helpful in getting city funding for the center. His portrait hung in the center for a long time, but it really wasn't named after him. But it holds a great place in my heart. As well, he was part of the group of men who were instrumental in this grant that was received from the federal government. he was a federal government employee and kind of knew the ropes of that sort of thing. He was the first manager of the Social Security office here. So when people would ask my mother, oh, are y'all from here? And she would say, no, we're newcomers. We came in 1965. This was probably around 2000. So for a long time, you were a newcomer unless you were third generation Murfreesboro. One of the things that Lisa asked for us to talk about were the acquisitions, the buildings, and things of that sort. So I wanted to go over some of those things. This is the document that you would need to fill out if you had some wonderful thing that you wanted to donate to Cannonsburgh. Now, the thing with that is that it needs to relate to Rutherford County or have significant historical well, I can't say that. It has to be important in history for us to keep it. It's especially nice if we have things that were made locally or were specific to an era. When we say Cannonsburgh, we like to dress up like this, but Cannonsburgh really covers from about 1811 in the early 1800s through, some of the literature says 1925 and some says 1945. I am not going to wear an 1840s dress. They were ugly, but all the rest of them are nice. It needs to be culturally specific to the life of the community. So we had someone that I knew years ago when we first came here come in with a pair of World War I military things of some sort and another item. And I told her it takes about 3 months or so to donate something, and we told her how to get one of these and fill it out. You have to fill it out, you have to take pictures, you have to turn it in, and it goes through a process at 3 levels with the city before we can accept it, because what happens sometimes is you don't want to get rid of Granny's old something or other, but it really isn't all that fabulous. But I don't want to give it to the Goodwill. I'll give it to the city, to Cannonsburgh. And there are lots of things that we really need as artifact to fill out our collection, but as an acquisition, then we are responsible for that forever. And some things, if they wear out, then what do we do with them? So these are some of the things that are important about donating items to Cannonsburgh. We would love to have more volunteers at Cannonsburgh. I retired in, I can't remember, I think 2009, and I played for a while. And I wanted to join everything, do everything, and then I was busier than I was when I was teaching. But Cannonsburgh was kind of the main place I wanted to be. And in fact, I said, when did they change the shaker roof, the wooden roof of the chapel? And they said, oh no, that's always been a tin roof. And I said, I beg your pardon. In that mind, I said, well, I think you're wrong as dirt, but I remember when it was here, and of course it did have that kind of roof, but they can't afford to put those kinds of roofs as replacements. So this idea of what you could do to help would be fun. I started out as a volunteer, and now I work there part-time, but I love it. It's a really great experience. Some of the interesting things about Cannonsburgh for me, and of course, when you make something personal, that's really neat. As Kathy said about the favorite places that she has, one of the things I really like is children want to throw water in the little well. We have a well that's enclosed. There are 3 old wells on the site, and they want to throw, well, how deep is it? And I don't tell them it's only 30 feet deep. They closed off that well because it's too dangerous, even though it has a metal grate. But we also have a well under the windlass. There's a big windlass. We've had wind energy for a long time. I don't know why we don't use it more. But that windlass, it doesn't really connect to the well that's there, but there is a well there as well. So there are some really neat and wonderful things. We've brought a lot of artifacts for you to look at, or not a lot, but some. Some of them aren't really old. Kathy's hand-woven bag is not period, as we call in the old Southern tradition, is not period correct. Our garments are not quite period correct, but they're close. We can't afford to be period correct. If you are an expert on 19th century textiles and you say, that's a cotton blend, that's not a cotton skirt, what are you doing wearing that? I'm going, I can't afford that fine stuff. So we make a lot of the things that we wear. Bobby bought the lovely outfit that he has that is from the Gentleman's Emporium, and it is probably the most authentic of all. We do have gloves. Kathy's got her gloves. I have my little tatted edged or crocheted handkerchief. Tatting was not as popular yet through 1860 as it was later. So there are a lot of things you think, well, that's old. Well, it's old, but really how old is it? How popular was it? I thought chicken scratch, if any of you know what chicken scratch is, which is embroidering around the white areas of gingham, which I did as a girl, I thought that was really old. Well, it's really not. So some things we think of as being really old are not quite as old as we thought that they were. We have a little songbook here that I put together when we go crazy people and sing in the cold. That's why he bought that heavy coat, because he was freezing to death. But there are things like Deck the Halls, for instance. They changed the lyrics to that during the 1920s because it was a drinking song that actually said, feed the mead cup, drain the barrel, yeah, and see the flowing bowl before us. That wasn't water. Laughing, quaffing, which means drinking altogether. So there are lots of things that are really interesting about old-time music stuff. And of course, with the Uncle Dave Macon Days Festival there, we get some of the newer old-time music. This is what's called a church doll, and this one I was going to take it home and wash it, but I didn't get it done in time. But mamas would wad up a little handkerchief or something in there, and they'd tie this when they were in church, and they'd hand it to a small child to play with this little bonneted-looking baby. And if they had time, they'd actually make it, put some little lace around it, make it fancier. But a lot of times it was just a handkerchief tied in knots to keep a baby from getting fussy in church. So this is a church baby, if you ever heard that term and wanted to know what that was.
I still use one from time to time.
This is a gown that's in the university house, and I took it home and washed it and ironed it and starched it, but it still has some places on it. And this is, if you were going to donate something, even if it had some discoloration and some holes in it, but you think it's a lovely piece, this is not that old because it has the sleeve edges right here. The sleeve edges prior to about 1885 or so were called drop shoulder sleeves. So it's not that old, but it is old, and it's lovely, and it's got little handmade tucks in it. So if you wanted to consider donating something, you know, we would love to look at it and see if it fits in with what we're doing. Miss Kathy needs to talk a little bit about a couple of the things that she brought. I dropped my handkerchief. Would one of you gentlemen come pick up my handkerchief? It's hard to bend over in this corset, but don't I look pretty? You know,
That's
I don't have a muffin here.
That's why I didn't try to help you. Okay, I take these places, and when I do my tours, one of my first questions, does anyone have any idea what this object would be, or what it would be used for? It is pretty much the forerunner of a microwave. It's called a reflector or reflectory oven. And what they would do, they would put the plates up on the trays, and if everyone was out in the field, they'd turn it toward the fire to keep the food warm. I've also been told by the gentleman that's the curator at Craig Font that you could make bread in it. And I did not know that, but he assured me that that was one of the uses of it, was to make bread. And this, we understand, was actually made in our blacksmith shop. It's a homemade pot scrubber for all the iron skillets and things. And y'all are welcome to come look at these things. And this I took out of the schoolhouse. We were lucky to have a lot of very old books donated, and this one was a little better for traveling. and it is a Winston Reader. And we have a lemon squeezer, and y'all are welcome to come up and look at these things when we get done. And this is a apple or potato peeler. We say it's about circa 1860. And, of course, my bag is actually, it's not exactly here, but it is woven on a room like we do have in the village. And this is a saw or cabbage cutter. We have several of these. We have a lot of things like this in the dining room at the Lehman House on the wall for people to see. I found this in our general store. This is a program from the opening day of Cannonsburgh, and Saturday, June 26, 1976. And in our museum, there is a huge Declaration of Independence, and everyone that came that day was welcome to sign it. And we still have it under glass in the museum. So everyone is welcome to come and look and touch or whatever. So we thank y'all for having us here.